Greetings and welcome, travelers. This video is a recap of one of the D&D campaigns that I am currently running. Because of this, it will be more of a summary of the game rather than the full entire first session. If you're a player, this serves more as a recap of the entire story. If you randomly found this video online, then you're more than welcome to listen to. Without further ado, let's introduce who I am. First of all, my name is Nick. I am the DM for the story, and that's not really important since you're not really going to need to remember me for the story. And with that out of the way, we shall start our journey. The journey starts inside a large grey temple, where remains of the ceiling reach up as high as the church chapel, with chunks of the roof now missing and letting sunlight through. Inside, the floor is quite dusty and not well kept, again with the large chunks of the ceiling lying on the ground. There is an old tattered blue carpet with symbols on it that lead towards the center of the room. At the center of the room is a large stone statue of a hooded figure, his gaze now only met with the rune stones that meet before him. Before him lies a decent sized rune on the ground, big enough to be about 12 feet or 4 meters in diameter. The rune is glowing a white yellowish color. It then begins to light up more radiantly, and suddenly a large beam of light shoots out into the sky through the holes in the ceiling. The light only lasts for a couple of seconds, and then our first adventurer enters the game. A young looking girl steps out of the portal, played by the player Nikolai. Her name is Ava Greencastle, and is actually a very old elven woman who is on a quest to look for her vodka drunken husband. As her eyes adjust the room, she steps out of the room, and takes in the view, the early morning air reflecting a bit of haze in her eyes. She looks towards the wall on her right, and sees her adventuring equipment resting along its side. She walks over to her equipment, and picks up her things. Then with no time to spare, she walks towards the door. However, on her way out, she hears a strange sound, and looks behind her to see the rune shooting up another pillar of light. This time, a healthy man walks out into the center of the light. His name is Malkeith, a character controlled by a player known as Ginger. Malkeith walks out to see the elven woman with her weapon out, and rushes to his equipment on the side of the room. Both of them grab their equipment, and for a second, there is a standstill. Both adventurers don't know what to do yet. Both of them equally as cautious as the other one opposite of them. Then, the third beam of light shoots into the sky. Yang Wen Li, a Chinese martial artist monk, walks out of the portal, and sees the two armed people in front of him. Yang sees his equipment on the wall, but chooses to take a fighting stance, determining that his odds are better if he fought them now, rather than attack them later when they would be more ready for him. The situation in the room, now with 3 characters, starts to flare up as each one of them looks hastily at one another. That's when Yang hears a portal behind him fire up again, and another character steps out. The woman by the name of Skaranina looks at the confused trio, and does the first thing that she can think of. She offers to assist them. Skara was raised in the Seathrank Empire, thinking for her entire childhood that she was a snake person, but then she realized that she was an Aasimar, and from there, she went on to search for her real family. Because of her abandonment issues, she had developed a sort of motherly instinct within her personality. With the introduction of the new motherly figure, the 4 of them slowly lowered their weapons and fists, and started to understand what was going on. Each one of them viewed the other one, and figured out that they were in the same situation. All of them figured out that the worlds that they had come from were in fact not the same ones as the others, and that they don't really remember what the last thing they saw was. The closest thing that they remembered was just seeing darkness, then a bright light, and then they were suddenly here. The group was now more lost than ever, so in order to seek out answers, Ava was the first to take charge, as she was motivated to find her husband, with the rest of them following closely behind. As the group was halfway through the church, the portal lit up once more, and falling from the sky came the final member of the party. He hit the ground with a great thud, and looked up to see the party of 4 looking him dead in the eye from across the room. The party saw the large dragonborn male had landed on his face, and upon seeing him, he had ran to take cover behind some of the chunks of the fallen ceiling. Not wanting to waste any more of her time, Abel took off through the large stone doors of the temple, leaving the group to deal with the dragonborn stranger. After a little bit of convincing, Yang Wen Li was able to convince the dragonborn to come out and talk to them. He introduced himself as Balazar, a rogue that has been on the streets for his entire life. He had got around like the traditional dragonborn orphan did when they were left on the streets, by stealing goods and getting into fights. keeping to it once he found out that he had a certain talent for it. As the group finished introducing themselves to the newcomer, they noticed something. The once radiant rune that was shooting out pillars of light had gone quiet. In fact, it had gone quite dim. After a few seconds, the rune had started to close in on itself and disappeared entirely before their eyes. Knowing that they had no way back from this place, the group of 4 decided to head out to go find where their companion Abel had went off to. Meanwhile, as Abel had stepped out the doors, she had caught her first real glimpse of the land. She was standing outside of a large stone temple that resembled a steeple. It was partially submerged into a large hill. Vines and brush had crept its way onto the stone walls, showing its quite obvious age. Before her, she could see great mountains in the distance, and a land filled with light before her. She could see off to the distance that there were about 3 to 4 different well-sized towns, and while she could not get a good view of them, she could tell by the blurred image that they were all quite different in how they looked. Some of them had great towers, some of them had a whole bunch of small houses, and some of them had giant coliseums in them. Looking towards the bottom of the hill that she was standing on, she saw a small little town that was bordered by a sparse forest. Seeing that it was the closest place to go, Abel started to make her way down towards the town. As she got closer towards the town, she realized that the townspeople, for the most part, were all looking at her. Huddled into nooks and crannies of the town, the villagers watched as Abel made her way from the edge of the town to the inner streets. Confused and wanting answers, Abel walked over to a fruit and vegetable vendor who had appeared on the side of the road. As Abel approached the woman, she was able to see that the woman was quite visibly shaking. Her skin was a quite distinct pale color, and she watched as Abel would take each step closer and closer towards her. When Abel greeted her with a simple hello, the woman responded with a hushed and quivering voice. "Oh my god, you're one of them, aren't you?" Confused, Abel asked the girl to elaborate more, but instead the girl just asked, "Did you come from that temple up there?" as she pointed to where Abel had just come from. Abel hesitantly told the woman yes, to which the woman promptly stated that you do not have much time before they get here. Abel, once again confused, asked who was coming. The woman looked at her and said, "The factions." Apologizing for the vague answer and the confusion it caused, the woman told Abel that this world is mostly ruled by factions as their main fighting force. Each faction has their own ideals and goals that they hope to seek out. In addition, each faction wants to gain the leading edge over the other factions, so that they can have a better chance when facing off against the others. She told Abel that the portal where she had come from was special, because nobody had ever been summoned out of there for a very long time. In fact, nobody around here could even remember when the last time it was used. But because Abel was summoned out of the portal, that means that she had something special with her, and that the factions would want to come and seek her out. Abel cut off the woman's ranting, and while looking her dead in the eyes, asked, "What are the evil factions that I need to look out for?" The woman, a bit taken back, told Abel, well, there are a handful of different factions. While the main factions are all at each other's throats, there are factions who specialize in being evil. First of all, there are the anomalies, who aren't really evil by definition, but they have a chance to be. They're essentially split off groups from the major faction, who go out to find their own goals. Then there are the devils who live in hell and are ruled by the devil kings. After that, there are the demons who live in the abyss, the strongest of whom are called demon lords. Then there are the black marionettes, a group of people who work in mystery, but are effective in bringing harm to almost all factions through their tricky ways. There are also the doomed, who are a group of once heroes who have turned evil due to the corruption of the doomed. Aliens also exist in this world, and they're more wild and less strategic than most other factions. Along them there are the constructs, which is a group of metallic robots that are strong and strategic in planning. After that, there are the Jester's Nightmares, who are powerful carefree monsters and humans that seek to bring pain through chaos. And finally, there are... But just before she could finish that sentence, Abel heard a noise behind her to see that the rest of the group had caught up to her. As the group got closer, they started to hear something strange. At first it sounded a bit like grinding metal, then it got louder, and they could hear that it was the sound of weapons colliding in battle. They listened carefully, but couldn't determine which one direction it was coming from. It sounded like the battle was happening all around them. With this new knowledge, Abel, Balthazar, and Scara all ducked into an alleyway in order to avoid the ensuing battle. Meanwhile, Yangwen Li and Malkeith both decided to do some more investigating to see what was going on. They walked to the edge of the street and peered over to look into the next street over. There they saw a group of 6 people, all dressed in various types of adventurers armor. Some of them dressed in large furs, while others dressed in more lightweight leathers. The group seemed to be headed by a boy who couldn't have been more than 18 or 19, fairly physique with light brown hair, dressing in clothing that could only be described as hunter's apparel. Different pelts from what seemed to be different monsters and tads of metal held it together. Yangwen Li and Malkeith watched as the boy and his companions would yell at something down the street saying, "We know who you are," and "Yeah, go back to your bosses and tell them to back off." Peering down the street where the group was yelling at, they could see that there was a group of small little kobold kids running away from the battle. When they looked back, they could see that the new group of adventurers started making their way towards them. Yang and Malkeith both ducked back into the original street. At this point, the players were conflicted on what to do. They couldn't tell whether to confront these new people or duck away and hide along with the rest of the group. As Yang and Malkeith argued on the street, they started to draw the attention towards themselves. That's when Yang looked up to see the group of adventurers heading towards their way. Yang prepared himself for the worst, as the brown-haired leader made his way towards them. Keeping his composure, Yang met their gaze. The brown-haired boy, in a young, anxious voice, asked Yang if he had just come from the temple right now. Yang looked him dead in the eyes and said, "No, I did not." The brown-haired boy said, "Oh, alright. If you do see anybody that's come down from the temple, please tell me. It's Vanguard business and we must find them." Switching the conversation over, he asked Malkeith if he was from the temple on the hill or if he knew where the people from the temple had gone. To which Malkeith replied, "No, but what do you plan on doing to them?" The boy then said, "Well, we would find them and lead them to one of our closest faction towns. The heads of the town wish to enroll any ancient summons because they are said to have great power and can significantly help out our faction. We would ensure that they have the protection of Vanguard, so please, if you find them, tell us." The boy then started to walk away. Malkeith stopped the boy, and the boy said, "Listen, if you don't have any information on where they are, I'm sorry, but I have to go." That's when Malkeith said, "Oh, but I do know where they are. Just follow me into this alleyway." To which the boy gleefully agreed and signaled for the rest of the group to come with him. In the alleyway, the two groups met for the first time. Getting a good look at everybody, the brown-haired boy introduced himself as Matthew, the sort of team leader of their little group. He then introduced Jack, a black-haired young boy who wielded 2 daggers. Daniel, a larger boy with a large wooden club, was the third to introduce himself. Tan, a girl who looked just as capable as Matthew and wielded a large pole staff, then introduced herself. The magic users, Zeke and Tiff, were the last of the group to introduce themselves. As the introductions were going on, 2 things were happening. 1. Around the time that Jack introduced himself, Scar had noticed a little group of kobold kids peering into the alleyway, their big yellow eyes fixated on the group. The second thing that was happening during the introductions was that Balthazar had snuck over to Matthew and proceeded to take out his sword from Matthew's sheath. Without Matthew noticing, he pocketed Matthew's sword into his own sheath. With introductions out of the way, Matthew told the group of adventurers that they should follow him, and he could promise their protection for now. Seeing this as a good opportunity, the group decided to go with the Vanguard, but their trust wasn't fully in their new friends. As they turned to leave the alleyway, the Vanguard troops saw the kobold kids, and Jack along with Tan both ran out into the street to chase them away. They watched as the kobold kids whooped and hollered down the street. "This isn't good," Matthew said. "We should leave immediately before the other factions get here." They walked down the now abandoned street, hearing the clashing of metals and breaking of wood occurring all around him. After a few minutes of cautiously looking down each street, turning corners ever so slightly, the group finally saw the exit towards the town. Matthew pointed down the street and said, "Come on." However, something stopped the group. Standing on the roofs of the house that lined the streets, Standing on the roofs of the houses that lined the streets were 2 figures. their long capes waving in the wind. The one on the left side stood a blue-haired boy, who wore fine blue clothes and gold metal armor around himself. On the opposite side there stood a girl with green hair and with a hint of teal. Her armor mimicked her counterpart, only that instead of wearing blue, she wore green. The armor itself seemed fairly fancy for the most part, almost looking like silk, and each one of them had a crest on their attire. They both jumped off the buildings, landing quite elegantly, and they started to approach the group. As they were approaching, the players saw that both of these new people had long thin swords by their side, their handles and guards glistening not only with silver and gold, but some very distinct red gemstones on one and white ones on the other. The one in blue was the first to speak as he walked up towards Matthew. He asked Matthew in a very dignified voice if these were the people who were just summoned. Matthew answered with a nod to his head. Turning towards the group, both the blue and green soldiers bowed their heads and said, "It is a pleasure to meet you." The blue soldier said that his name is Jason. He is the captain of the vanguard. Then the green soldier introduced herself as Lisa, another captain of the vanguard. They say that while they wish to carry out their pleasantries further, time is not a pleasure that they have at the moment, and that they must go. As the group turns away, once again Balthazar decides that he wants to steal/pickpocket the blue captain. As he sneaks up towards Jason, Balthazar reaches for Jason's encrusted sword handle and lands his hand on it. As he's about to pull out the sword, he realizes that the sword handle has a large giant lock around it, and he quickly diverts his hand movement into Jason's pocket, pulling out a large badge with the Vanguard symbol on it. He then backs away slowly, relishing in his mini victory. As the new increased force makes their way towards the edge of town, they see the gate that borders the outside road to the inside of the town. It's an old gate that doesn't really keep anything in or out, but is more there for an indicator than anything, showing where the town begins and the forest ends. However, standing inside the gate, there are the 6 Cobalt kids, all standing in a line. The players are confused at first to what they are doing there, but then out of the woods comes a flying red scythe that swoops through, cutting 3 of the Cobalt kids' heads clean off. A split second later, a giant red greatsword comes crashing out of the trees, not only shattering any trees and fence posts in its way, but cutting the last 3 of the Cobalt kids' heads off. Their bodies fall to the floor lifeless, and out of the woods walks 2 figures. The first is a lean man wearing a gigantic crooked black hat. He is wearing primarily a red outfit that looks like a mix between a wizard's cloak and a clown's outfit. He greets the group with a wicked smile. The other figure towers over the hatted man. He stands about 8 feet tall and is covered from boot to head with thick red metal armor. His helmet looks quite simple with only 3 dark slits on it, and his armor has different little symbols on it. Many of them look like they are out of a satanic ritual. The 2 of them make their way over towards the bodies. The scythes return to the Hat Man and disappears into his hands. Meanwhile, the large Crimson Knight walks next to him, dragging his massive sword along the ground. The 2 of them lean over the dead bodies, and as they do, the blood from the Cobalt kids run up their arms and absorb into their armor. As this happens, the players can see that the 2 of them gain a sort of red aura around them. Abel leans over towards Matthew and asks him what everybody was thinking. Who were those 2 guys? Matthew responds in a bit of a hushed yet angry voice that those 2 are the Blood Mage Ace and Blood Knight Helm. They are very dangerous members of the Chaotic Faction, another faction that rivals the Vanguard. That's when the man in the hat, Ace, speaks up. He says in a twisted voice towards Lisa, "That's a pretty nice group you got there. I'm sure that you already sold them on your whole goody two-shoes parade, right?" Lisa, ignoring his comment, holds out her badge and says that this is official Vanguard business. Step away or we will initiate combat. Ace, not fazed by this, says, "Oh come on, I'm just trying to have a little fun. I bet you didn't even let them have a choice in the matter." He then turns towards the players of the group and says, "Hey, why don't you join us? It'll be a lot more fun than hanging out with these Vanguard people." Abel jumps into the conversation and asks what the benefits of joining them would be. Ace says with a grin, "Well, of course, if you help us, we will help you. We will give you all your power, and all the while will bring out fun and chaos." Malkeith, now with Ace's attention, asks him one simple question. "If we join you, will we be able to go back home?" "Well, you see, that all depends on you now, doesn't it?" Ace replies. "With unlimited chaos comes a limited potential, does it not?" Malkeith then turns to Jason and asks the same question. Jason, a bit unsure in his answer, states, "We may not have a solution to return you home just yet, but we will do everything in our power to get you back to your respected homes." The group then all nods towards each other and agree. They will help the vanguard. With that, Jason reaches into his pocket and pulls out the badge that is not there. Continuing the motion, he says, "By the orders of Captain Jason of the Vanguard, stand back or face us in combat." He then realizes that he does not have his badge. Balthazar looks a little shifty in the back of the group, but nobody really notices. At this point, Jason says, "Oh, forget it," and he reaches for his sword handle. Lisa does the same. Both of the locks unhinge as they grab their sword handles. Lisa brandishes her sword at the two enemies, with flames flickering off the edge of the sword, and Jason does the same. Only when he pulls out his sword, a small little gust of wind can be seen spinning around the blade itself. Ace looks at the players, and he coyly asks, "So, none of you wish to join?" With no response, he says, "Alright, let's have a little fun then, shall we?" As he says that, 3 glowing sights appear above his head, spinning clockwise and creating a chopping sound in the air. At the same time, Helm lifts up his massive sword, which is now glowing with a red aura itself. Ace wastes no time making the first attack. He sends the first 3 sights flying towards Jason and Lisa. One of the sights barely hit Lisa, causing her to get a small cut on her arm, while Jason slashes the air with his sword, using the gust of wind that comes from it to push himself out of harm's way. The group of lower-ranked Vanguard soldiers all look at Matthew for what to do. Matthew reaches for his sword to start a rally cry, but then realizes it isn't there. He freaks out for a moment, but then Balthazar taps him on the shoulder and tells him, "Hey, I think you dropped this." Matthew, with pure joy, tells Balthazar thank you, raises his sword, and tells the troops to all go and attack the giant blood knight known as Helm. Matthew is the first to strike, slashing at Helm's armor, but compared to the giant knight, he is no match. Helm grabs Matthew's sword and flings it into the forest. He then grabs Matthew's shield with his left hand, and crumples it as if it were paper. Seeing their leader in trouble, the rest of the group charges into battle. Jack and Tan both try their best to attack Helm, but it is to no avail. His armor is too thick. However, Daniel comes in wielding his large club and slams it down on Helm's head, causing a loud metal ringing to be heard as the helmet vibrates. Meanwhile, Zeke and Tiff are both in the background, firing fireballs and air blades towards Ace, which he manages to avoid quite gracefully. As Ace dances around the battle, Scarra runs up towards him and swings at him, but as she does so, he disappears and reappears about 5 feet in front of her. At this time, Abel uses her true sight ability to find the weakness in Helm's armor, and fires the arrow perfectly landing between the cracks of his armor. Yang runs over towards Helm, trying to land a few good hits on him, but once again, the armor is too tough for his bare fist. Balthazar runs over and leaps onto Helm's back, and starts stabbing at the giant knight, but nothing seems to work. Helm then reaches onto his back and flings Balthazar onto the ground in front of him. Seeing this opportunity, Lisa runs at full speed towards Helm. Raising her flaming sword up, she slashes down on Helm with such a great force that it cuts into his armor, the flames inside burning his muscles. She then jumps backwards, pulling her blade along with her. Jason is fighting Ace as he sends slash after slash at him, tearing pieces of his clothes off, but never getting a defining hit. Outraged by the flurry of attacks on him, Helm lifts up his giant greatsword and brings it down towards the ground. The ground shakes and trembles as red energy shoots up through the ground, injuring all those around him and completely knocking out Tan with a shot to her head. Ace, on the other hand, is doing just fine as he readies 3 more sights and flings them into the crowd, not only hitting Jason with a more direct hit, but also hitting Yang Wenli and Scarra. The 3 of them kneel over for a second. Lisa then charges the Helm once again, this time stabbing into his shoulder. However, Helm was ready this time, and she was met with a large hulking fist that plowed her backwards. Jack and Daniel both went to cover Lisa as they attacked Helm, dealing minor damage to him. However, unknown to Helm at the time, they were actually opening up his armor even more so from where Lisa had attacked him the time before. Tiff, seeing that there were still smolders of fire burning inside of Helm, used her magic to control the fire and created a small inferno inside of Helm's arm, causing Helm to let out a muffled shout that seemed to resemble a bull. The players then, seeing the opening on Helm, charged him with shot after shot, cutting into the patches of skin that were bare of armor. Helm, however, had his eyes set on a different target. Fixated on Captain Lisa, he pushed through the pain and started to charge towards the captain that had made him vulnerable. He lifted up his sword and fired the sword like a missile straight at Lisa. The sword hit Lisa square in the chest, impaling her, and the only thing that made it worse was the large body of Helm as he rammed her into a tree afterwards. Seeing that his fellow captain had fallen, Captain Jason averted his attention from Ace towards Helm. Helm only had time to fling the body off of his sword before Ava released her next shot, an arrow straight into his heart. Helm lurched over for a second, then pushed himself back up, letting out another roar, this time at Ava. It was too late, however. Jason had already propelled himself up into the sky, and soaring downwards with his blade of wind, stabbed Helm straight through the neck. The body of Helm fell down onto the ground, motionless. Ace saw this and let out a volley of scythes that cut into the adventurers and the vanguard, Jason taking the blunt of the force and knocking Skara out cold. The adventurers all rushed the tricky mage, but he was too fast, bouncing over their swords and leaping off their clubs. April fired an arrow at Ace, to which he teleported. However, being too cocky for his own good, he landed straight in front of Yang Win Lee, who landed a full force punch on his chest. Ace flipped backward, and red aura started to flow out of him. Some of the adventurers saw this, but it was too late. The scream was so terrible that it started to hurt and rupture the party's minds. By the time it was done, Jason was lying on the ground, and the entire party was barely standing. Ace stood there with a large grin on his face and said, "Come on, we're barely getting started." Just then, 2 daggers could be heard dropping to the ground as Jack ran away from the battle. Just as the fight was about to go on again, a building behind them burst into splinters. Through the rubble came 3 men. One was dressed in dark leather armor with the hood on. As he flew through the air, arrows shot from his cloak and twirled around him. Then they would leave to go fire at the other 2. One of them was a larger man. He was significantly more exposed than the other men, wearing pure golden armor that seemed to resemble something of a gladiator, and wielding a large double-sided axe. The third was a large big-bellied man who was covered in large black armor. The armor was spiked, and in both of his hands he held 2 giant morning stars attached to chains, in which he would fling at his opponents. Abel and Balthazar did notice another person, however. Just across the street on another rooftop, a figure in a large dark blue coat was standing there watching them. He had a large scarf that was flowing elegantly in the breeze. His hair color was a sort of deep blue, almost the color like the ocean's deep seas. The group looked panicked. Not only did they have to face Ace, but there were 3 more combatants that they would most surely have to face. To make matters worse, Jason and Lisa were both pretty much useless at this point, and their entire group was weak. Just as that thought passed them, however, a large gray bubble expanded out of the temple, and as it expanded, it grew to consume the entire town up until the gate. The group looked around and saw that the fighting had stopped. Then they looked down at their cuts and bruises and realized that they had started to go away. Viewing at everybody else, it seemed like they were being healed by something. Even Lisa got up, which was only a temporary rejoice, as Helm also got to his feet, using his sword to prop himself up. From the center of the street, a woman with white hair walked towards them. She wore a white gown and a blue tarp over it. The tarp was covered in different white symbols, similar to the ones on the rune that summoned them. She spoke in a calm voice to the players. She said, "I am sorry, adventurers, that we had to meet under these most hazardous of conditions." Ace then butted in, saying, "Hey, old lady, these are our summoned guys. Go find your own." The woman then lifted up her hand and whispered, "Shush," as Ace and Helm both fell unconscious. She then turned to the others and said, "Does anybody else wish to interject?" None did. She introduced herself as one of the agent's assistants. She is the guardian of the temple. She was supposed to wake up moments after they arrived, but due to being inactive for a long time, it took her longer than expected. She then turned towards the others and said, "We shall let you make your case to each of the summons, and then the summon shall decide which faction they wish to join." She turned towards the players and said, "I know that these factions have caused you problems so far, but I do recommend that you choose to take part in one of them. They will help you along your journey greatly." She then turned towards the other factions and said, "We shall let you make your case towards each of the summons, and then the summon shall decide which faction they wish to join." Moments later, all of the factions in town gathered together. The ancient assistant called each player up towards the middle of the crowd, one at a time, and let the factions introduce one person to give their reasons why the summon should join them. The first person to choose their faction was Yang Wen Li. As he stepped towards the center, he looked around and saw a few factions had stepped forward. The first one was Matthew from the Vanguard, who said, "For fighting by our side, we would love to have you be part of our faction. The Vanguard stands for all that is good in the world, being the first to stand up against anything bad in this world." Then, the man in the gladiator outfit stepped forward with a double-sided battle axe, and said, "My name is Drog. I come from the faction known as the Mass. Due to your strength, we wish for you to join us. We stand for being able to grow stronger as an individual, by being strong through us all." Yang Wen Li had decided it would be best to go with the Mass, and as he accepted, Drog gave him one giant handshake that shook Yang. The next one up to choose was Abel. As she walked up, she once again saw the Vanguard extend their hand. So did the Mass. However, this time a new person stepped forward. The person was dressed in large purple wizard robes. As she walked towards Abel, she explained that her name was Kale, a sorcerer from the faction group called the Extraordinary. Because of Abel's strategic thinking in combat, she has proved her wits and would become a perfect match for the Extraordinary. Abel then looked around at the other factions and saw the blue-scarfed man standing there by himself. He would give her a quick look and then turn his attention elsewhere. After a time debating, Abel decided it would be best to go with the Extraordinary and return to her group. After Abel, Malkeith walked up to the center. Malkeith was offered to join the Vanguard and the Extraordinary. However, the promise of justice and always doing good swayed Malkeith so much that he joined the Vanguard. The Vanguard members cheered as Malkeith walked among their ranks. It was time for Balthazar's turn. Balthazar was offered again a rank among the Vanguards, to which he decided was not the best idea since he was a thief. Then the hooded man in black, arrows still hanging from his belt, approached him. He told Balthazar that his name was Knife, and that he was from a faction known as the Desolates. He knew that Balthazar wasn't some kind of righteous hero, but with the Desolates he would fit in. Almost all Desolates were some kind of assassin or rogue of some kind, their motto being something under the lines of playing dirty in order to win at all costs. This was very tempting to Balthazar, and to prove his worth towards them, he offered up Captain Jason's badge that he stole. Seeing this, Jason rushed over to snatch it out of Balthazar's hand. He said, "You stole this from me?" as he questioned. "I thought you were a good person, but stealing isn't what our faction stands for, so I revoke our offer." Just then, a hefty laughter was heard. Balthazar looked over to see the large big-bellied man in black armor walk out. He laughed and said, "You made him pretty mad. Why don't you join us over here?" He is from the faction known as the Dark Sigil. His soldier name is Drag 48 Elite. They stand for making the world better through the rise of hate. Seeing his offers, Balthazar wanted more, and he looked towards the blue-scarfed man. The blue-scarfed man watched Balthazar. As if to show off, as the Black Knight turned round to go back to his crowd, Balthazar slipped off the back of his helmet piece and slid one of the giant flinging morning stars out of his belt. A feat impressive for anybody, since the thing was about half the size of Balthazar. All the while, Drag 48 Elite had no idea what was going on. Balthazar looked back at the blue-scarfed man, and he was smiling, and he signed for Balthazar to walk over. He introduced himself as Rain. He was a member of the faction known as Solar Rain. They only accept the best of the best. Everyone incapable of standing with them will be left behind. He told Balthazar that if he would like to join Solar Rain, he could promise Balthazar that he would be given more potential than he would with any of these other factions. Seeing this offer, Balthazar agreed. Before he left, however, Rain gave Balthazar a symbol that had a sun on it. It had a crown and sword in front of the sun. He told Balthazar that if you ever need help, just raise the symbol into the sky and the help would be on its way. He then departed from the circle. The last up was Skara. She looked around the groups for a while, but nobody really seemed to step forward. Skara felt a bit discouraged, but then the assistant held her onto her shoulder and said the Dust faction shall accept her. When she said that, some scrawny people in rags walked out and said that they are part of the Dust faction. They may be weak, but they are still a faction nonetheless, and with the ancient summon on their side, they will be sure to gain strength. With that, the assistant said, "I believe that is all for now." She told the adventurers that their purpose in the world has just begun, and good luck on their new journey. She then disappeared into the crowd. Shortly after, the crowd separated, each one either talking to the new summon or making their way back towards their faction towns. After a bit of mingling, the group met up back together. They discussed many things about their own factions, but in the middle of their conversations, they heard a scream from the other side of the village. They decided as the new heroes, they must go and help whoever was in need. As they arrived at the edge of the forest, they saw a rumbling in the bush. Seconds later, a giant eagle shoots into the air, and two massive elk starts trotting their ways towards the player. In the center of them stands a cloaked figure, dressed in all black. Skara asked this new person who he is, but he did not respond. Then Balthazar flashed his solar rain marker at him, and tells the man to back down. The man looks at him, and in a deep voice says, "It's a shame you're gonna lose that after just arriving here." He then slides two daggers down from his wrist and charges the group. He slashes right and left at each groupmate, cutting each one of them pretty good. Abel fires an arrow at him, only to be rammed by a giant elk seconds later. Skara runs over to attack the assassin, but is stopped midway by the giant eagle and its talons. During the commotion, Balthazar sneaks away and hides in the forest brush. Yang Wenli runs towards the assassin and engages in close range combat. Both are skilled fighters, but Yang is faster as he fires blow after blow, eventually knocking the assassin backwards. As Yang is about to run after him again, the second elk topples him onto the ground and starts trying to stomp on him, barely missing Yang's head with every hoof that impacts the ground. Skara runs towards the assassin, and as she does so, she is healed by a Malkeith. She lands a good blow on the assassin, forcing him to tumble backwards. Regaining his footing, the assassin directed the elks to attack both Abel and Skara. As the elks trampled over them, they became battered and bloody, coming close to the brink of death. However, the assassin didn't notice that Balthazar had snuck behind him and jumped out of the bushes, stabbing him in the side. The assassin lunged away from the repeated attacks, and now in the open, Abel fired a perfect arrow, landing directly into the assassin's skull. The assassin fell over, his hood dripping over his lifeless face. Upon realizing the assassin's death, the elk and hawk retreated back into the forest. Getting their first taste of actual combat, they looted the body. Both Skara and Malkeith found a giant egg, to which they promptly secured. Abel found some vials of poison that the assassins had on him, and Yang found some of the assassin's gold. Balthazar was the luckiest. He found that on the assassin was a small box, inside of which held a curved dark blade of the assassin's dagger. There was one more thing they found as Skara searched the pouch. It was a letter with a broken black seal on it. Inside the letter read, "We are hiring you to kill off those summons that have just came into this world. Do this and you might find yourself a real assassin very soon. Good luck out there, apprentice." The group looked nervously at each other as they realized that not only was there somebody or something out there that hated them, but something that was seeking to kill them off. They then pocketed the letter and decided it was best to head off to their own respective faction towns. So that does it for this first session of the D&D campaign. I will try to keep up with this schedule every time we have a campaign. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed it.